to PSU Friday Transportation Seminar. Today we will have one of our own, John MacArthur, to talk about the e-bikes in the United States. John is a research associate with Oregon Transportation Research and Research Education Consortium. And without further ado,
thank you. So first of all, I apologize. I'm a little under the weather, so if I cough for the people on the web, I will try to not cough right into the mic. And yeah, so my name is John MacArthur, and I work with Dr. Dill at OTREC. And for the last couple of years, I've been doing research around electric vehicles, so the broad range of electric vehicles. But in Portland and in the United States and elsewhere, that we look at transportation electrification as including a broad range of electric vehicles, and that also includes electric bikes. So we've started to do some research around electric bikes, and I'm going to present an overview of electric bikes, but particularly around a user survey that we did last spring. So in general, the presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit why do e-bikes matter, and then give a little bit of overview of e-bikes, and then talk about the survey. So first of all, has anybody ridden an electric bike? So for the people on the internets, that's about 6 or 7. And so that's a pretty good group of people that have ridden them. I've actually, over the last, I would say, year, continually see more and more e-bikes. Particularly you notice them when they're passing me, which is not hard. But so I think almost everybody's an e-bike. But it actually, once you start seeing what an e-bike is, you start cluing in on the little types of e-bikes and recognizing them. So why do e-bikes matter? So this is a slide from Dr. Pettini that he uses, but I think it's a really good overview of kind of why are we trying to get more people to bike, and why we are talking about e-bikes right now. So there's obviously these major safety issues and environmental issues and cost issues of the cost of driving. So we're looking at encouraging more active modes of transportation. So in Portland, though, and this is out of the Portland Climate Action Plan, that we're looking at increasing that mode share, particularly around bikes. So if we are, right now, about 6%, mode share, and in 2030, we're looking at, 25% mode share. How are we going to get there? I mean, is it just creating more bike lanes? Is it, getting out there and telling other people to bike more? So we're kind of looking at, are we in that chasm of technology adoption? How do we get more the majority of people biking, and how do we get to this pretty aggressive goal of 25%? But then if you take a step back out of our little bubble of Portland, we start looking at these other cities where we think we're pretty good at biking around here, but there's many cities that are way lower than us on mode share. And if we are trying to meet these kind of global issues and economic issues around the cost of driving, places like where I'm from, Toledo, Ohio, needs to really elevate its amount of biking or other types of modes of transportation. So why don't people bike? So there's a bunch of different factors. It might be safety reasons, lack of infrastructure in a lot of the cities around the country, weather. Obviously, I don't even like to bike when it's raining or it's cold. It might not be convenient to bike. Lack of fitness. There's lots of reasons why people personally choose that biking is not right for them. So, Dr. Dill talked about the research she did last spring around these 4 types of cyclists, and we're talking about shifting these kind of typologies of people. So how do we shift the interested and concerned to be a little bit more interested and concerned, or interested and less concerned? Or how do we get the no ways to be more interested in biking? Let's look at like some of the reasons why people don't bike, and then we're going to try to see how if an e-bike can fit some of those barriers. So obviously, you know, people that are older have a hard time wanting to bike and are maybe have more difficulties in biking. People that live in hilly areas, you know, it takes a lot more effort to go up a hill than to bike on a flat surface. People that commute greater than 5 miles, so places like Los Angeles up top, you know, it's daunting those distances to go in between for your trip destinations. People that have physical limitations that make cycling difficult, and this is kind of one of those chicken and eggs thing, is people find it more difficult. We're seeing larger increases in obesity rates for various different reasons, but lack of physical education is physical activity is a significant issue, and if they're not exercising, then they get in a vicious circle of becoming less able to be physical. Women tend to bike less than men. Women make up approximately 25% of all bike trips. So how do we encourage more cycling by women? In Japan, about 3/4 of riders are women, and in about 2/3 of people over 50 ride in Japan. And so is it, you know, maybe a U.S. cultural issue, or is it, you know, what can we do to promote that? People always don't feel safe biking in traffic. Now, that could be because of lack of infrastructure, but it also could feel that they're not going at speed with the traffic around them. People don't want to sweat or wear, you know, special clothes to commute. So, you know, these people down below, as you can see, they look great, but they have e-bikes because they didn't, you know, sweat, and they can wear their, you know, nice outfits, compared to the guy on the right there, where he's huffing and puffing, and he's going to get to work, and no one's going to want to be around him. So, or he needs to take a shower. People that need to haul or carry items. So this is, you know, goes into even on the commercial side, where, you know, we have Beeline here. A lot of people have seen them going around. Those are electrified trikes. So it helps hauling capacity, but also it helps, you know, hauling kids. You know, I have a lot of friends that have exercycles or cargo bikes, and a little extra wattage could help use those bikes more often. So what are the critical pieces of increasing cycling? You know, we kind of, you know, talk about infrastructure a lot. Critical mass, just more people biking, gets people interested in biking. Cost, and that's, you know, both the cost of buying a bike, but also the cost of gas can drive people into using other modes. It might be access to destinations where they need to go, or the proximity of those. And then just basic attitudes. But what I think is missing here, and from a lot of the literature in it where it's shifting, is technology a piece of that? You know, can technology also fit into this larger, I guess, puzzle to give us a better way of getting more people biking? So when we talk about technology, we're talking about maybe adding an electric motor to a bike. And so what is an electric bike? Well, it looks basically, you know, like a bike, but they have a battery, and they have a motor. So those motors could be on the front hub, or in the back hub. That's why the arrows are pointing to those, though this picture is a back hub motor. Or they can be a chain drive or a crank drive motor. Power controls and gear shifts are up on the top, so you can control them. And so, you know, that's basically what they look like. But they come in all shapes and sizes, and that's what's kind of unique here is that people are really experimenting on the electric bike range, as with bikes too, on, there might be trikes with electric assist on them. They might have batteries, underneath the seat. They might be on that back part of the bike. They might be a conversion. I guess I could be using this. Excuse me. Oh, did people hear? See it? Right here. This is a converted extracycle, so they put a motor on the back there, and also this is a conversion with a Bionics motor on there. So lots of different shapes and sizes, lots of different types of e-bikes. So there's really, when you talk about e-bikes, there's probably two different types you can put them into categories. One is what is called a throttle assist, where you basically are biking, you use your own power, but to get the extra boost, you're using a throttle, kind of like a motorcycle or a moped, to accelerate, to get you that power. Or what is called a pedalic, which is a powered assist bicycle, is as you bike, it understands or feels the tension, so the assist comes on. And as you are going up a hill, the power might increase. As you flatten out, it might decrease. And so those are basically the two different categories of e-bikes. But for our purpose and for what I think, particularly for our survey, but also for discussions, about e-bikes, and I don't want to confuse electric mopeds and electric scooters. So we're not talking about these. We're talking about electric assisted bicycle. When we get into some of the numbers about number of e-bikes in Asia, we see a lot of scooters and mopeds in that category. So let's define an e-bike. This is the definition of the Consumer Products Safety Act. It's any 2- or 3-wheel bicycle. But what are the key parts is that it has a motor with less than 750 watts. This is the U.S. definition. I'll talk about international in a second. And then it goes less than 20 miles an hour with that full motor engaged. So if anything above that, basically becomes a licensed vehicle, and then you have to get a license or it has to be registered with a state. In Oregon, they've actually have a little higher limit, which is 1,000 watts. And but what's interesting in Oregon is that you have to be 16 years or older. Now, I'm not sure exactly why that is in place, but it does seem somewhat prohibitive, in that 16-year-olds or 15-year-olds can't ride an electric assist, bicycle. But I found that kind of interesting. Now, one thing I just wanted to, kind of tell you as we get into this next slide is that, when we talk about watts, that's basically the power of the bike. And so if a cyclist is going 20 miles an hour on a flat road, no headwind, they're putting about 220 watts of energy. So that's what it would take to move that bicycle that fast. So when you look at some of these wattage definitions around the world, that's basically where they're kind of saying, well, we'll call it an electric bike at 250 or above. So and then basically just in general, like an untrained cyclist, that is just starting to bike, they're probably putting in about 80 watts per as they're riding around. A more fit cyclist is 150 to 200 watts, and then an elite bicyclist who's really working is doing 300 to 1,000 watts, depending on the type of racing or bicycling or cycling they're doing. So internationally, you can see how there is a little bit of variations about how they're defining an e-bike. They range from the U.S. at 750 watts down to 250. Top speeds, typically nothing more than 20 miles an hour at full throttle or full assist. But there is this kind of, do we allow the throttle only as considered an e-bike, or does it have to be pedal assist? And where we have in Europe and the EU is really that big discrepancy, right? Where if it's only throttle, they don't consider it an e-bike, and it would be classified as, a scooter type of, a vehicle. They're not prohibited, but they're no longer considered probably a bicycle, or use different types of infrastructure and those type of stuff. And the other thing is operating pedals. This is not about putting some pedals and letting your feet just sit on them and move. They want that kind of movement of the body to propel the bicycle. And we'll talk a little bit about this later on, about some of this stuff and why these barriers of increasing e-bikes. So just in general, the market for e-bikes, we have about, last year, about 29 million sold. So on your left axis, this is the axis for Asia, which is this line. So they're selling about 29 million bikes in Asia last year, where this axis is the rest of the world. The big green swath is obviously it's Western Europe, so that's really where we see a lot of adoption of electric bikes over the last 10 years. Is Netherlands and Germany are the #1 consumers of e-bikes, and the U.S. So I'll go into the slide in a second, is quite low. One thing that was interesting is in Netherlands, 1 in 6 bikes that is sold as an e-bike. And last summer, they saw a decrease in purchase by 11% of conventional bikes, but an increase by 6% in electric bikes. So is that, are they at saturation of bicycle, standard conventional bikes? And we're starting to see that kind of, the people that would normally bike have gotten their bikes and they're biking, or older people are starting to bike more and they're using electric bikes, or what does that play and why we're seeing the increase is something I think it'll be interesting to find out. Let me see, moving on. So in the U.S., we're basically at, I guess in 2013, a little under 60,000 e-bikes sold. And if you did a 5-year, average, so kind of thinking about how many bikes might be on the streets in the U.S., it's about 200,000 if we kind of straight line that kind of curve, down. So, not a lot of bikes, but we're seeing definitely an increase in growth here. So, and that said is that when we look at the literature and look at a lot of the work that has been done around e-bikes, it has mostly focused on the European and Asian market. In Asia, there is an estimate of, or just in China, of over 100 million e-bikes, on the streets. And so a lot of the research has been focused on Asia and Europe. There's starting to be more research, and that's why we did this survey about e-bike adoption in the United States. And so last year, we decided to kind of try to understand who has e-bikes and why did they get e-bikes. So our basic research goals or questions were, will e-bikes get more people to bike and get people to bike more often? So, are they helping fill in and jump over the chasm and get more cyclists on the road? So we conducted a survey, and the methodology was we adopted a survey instrument that the Institute of Transportation Studies at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia, had put together. So They also did a very similar survey using this instrument in Australia during last year, late 2012, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but we're going to be comparing those results. But and that's one of the reasons we wanted to adopt a survey instrument to do some comparisons. The survey was distributed through e-bike blogs, forums, Facebooks of e-bike stores, Twitter accounts of people that talk about e-bikes, emails to manufacturers to try to get them to send it out to their client lists, retailers, and then in Portland we took this little survey card and put it in some stores, and then when I happened to be riding around, when I saw somebody who had an e-bike, I would whip it out and hand it to them. So, it was hard to catch up to them because they're on an e-bike. So the survey was from March to July of last year. We got 553 responses from the survey, and the geographic representation of where they are is pretty, dispersed. I mean, I think for us having to go out into the internet and try to push out a survey, which is the first time I ever had to do that, I was kind of happy to see this kind of spread. Though, one person in Iowa doesn't mean it's representative of the people in Iowa. So the demographics of what we got, largely male. Part of that I was thinking, could that be, obviously who owns them, the e-bikes, but also maybe how they got the survey. So one of the places that we put the survey up were about 5 or 6 e-bike forums, and I don't know the demographics of those forums, but they seem to be probably more techie in nature of looking at who's on them and talking. So that could be a more male oriented survey response. In general, we got people that were older, over 45, more highly educated, and a little bit higher income, obviously than normal. Then we also on race, most 90% white, all had access to a motor vehicle. Only 7% didn't have access to a motor vehicle. And then 30%, which was interesting, indicate that they had a physical condition that makes sustained riding a bike difficult. And then in general, they rated their health pretty good. Though I think where you see the fair and the poor also correlates with the people with physical conditions. So that when we're talking about physical conditions, it might be a bad knee or something. So purchase decisions. 48 had purchased an e-bike, and while 52 had converted a e-bike. And so, and I also think this is maybe there's some really good products out there for converting your bike at a cheap cost, and so a lot of especially the extra cycles. But also, again, going back to the e-bike forum, are these people more techie? They wanted to build their own e-bike, or they're more engaged in the technology. A broad range of types of bikes. What was interesting that I had not initially thought about was the cargo extracycle. We had not put a specific line for that, but we had to code it after under other. But 13% were cargo bikes. Most of the bikes, as we're seeing here, are purchased recently, and I think this correlates with where the sales numbers are going. But also, when you look at before 2005, 3%. So those people are definitely early adopters, and if not, building their own bikes. So we definitely are seeing some of that conversion of bikes are the older bikes. Cost, we see obviously the conversions being cheaper, newer bikes being more expensive, all-encompass packages. I don't know if they included the cost of the bike when they were thinking of the cost of the conversion. So that's one thing that could shift that a little bit. But a full range of, you can get into this at $500 to $2,500. So is it prohibitive? I don't know. If you're looking at substituting your car trips, maybe not. So what are the main reasons for buying an electric bike or converting it? So first, when we talk about replacing car trips, we really saw this was in the people that were under 55. So dark blue, so the blues are age, the greens are physical limitations, and the reddish ones are gender. So replacing car trips, we're looking at people that didn't have physical limitations and are under 55. So maybe they're using and we'll see later on that they're probably commuting with those bikes, doing more of that work. When we talk about health and medical conditions that reduce their ability to ride the bike, high percentage of people that say they have physical limitations, responded to that, but also people over 55. So kind of correlating there a little bit. Also, a reason because to increase their physical fitness, we saw that with older folks, and also a little bit people that felt that they had limitations. What's interesting is people that feel like they live in hilly areas, women chose this as a reason of why they wanted an e-bike versus the other ones that are a little bit less obvious of jumping out there. But when we talk about ride with less effort, men kind of a little higher, but still a pretty comparable level to the hill areas, because you would think those would kind of correlate a little bit, but again, people with limitations and older people also agreed with this was a reason. So when we look at what is the main reason for the trip purpose, is that we really see for commuting, it is younger people and people that don't have physical limitations. And when we're talking about recreation, it is the older people and with limitations. So they're probably not using their bikes for commuting. They're doing errands or recreating, because hopefully they're retired and enjoying their time. So so bike use. This was kind of interesting. 94% rode a bike before as an adult. Of that, 55 rode their bike weekly or daily. After the purchase of the e-bike, it went up to 93%. Of the 6% that said they never rode as an adult, that went up to 89%. So we see this is getting them out and riding more. And as you can see with the quote, that there's this element of fun, and this comes up a couple times later, but it's kind of interesting the enthusiasm people have shown with electric bikes. Also, getting around and where they go. 45% of people say that they would take a different route. 35% say they don't avoid hills, though 30% said they would take a lower, less direct route or less traffic. So, I'm not sure if the e-bike is really helping them or not, but and then 3/4 said that they're actually doing different destinations than if they had a standard bike. So what are these different destinations? They're saying that errands they're doing with the e-bike that they wouldn't have done. They might be going to hillier destinations a little lower, but places that are further away, they're saying that they're using their e-bike for. So let's talk about speed a little bit. So they said that in general, as you can see, the green is strongly agree and the light blue is disagree. Is that they all feel pretty much, not all, I mean, the majority feel that their top speed is higher. So, in general, though the under 55 didn't necessarily, because when you think about these e-bikes, they're topping at at 20 miles an hour, but you can still go faster than 20 miles an hour. And most, bicyclists can take their bike up to 30 miles an hour with, as we talked about the wattage earlier. So, a younger, person could take an e-bike and make it go faster. It's just the motor won't go faster than 20 miles an hour. But then what's interesting is that they also feel, and more so, is that their average speed was higher, which I think is a little bit more important about that idea about being less strenuous or feeling it's easier to get out and ride, especially with the older adults or people with physical limitations. So sweat and need for a shower. In general, people didn't feel like they didn't need a shower after doing their trips. Even the younger people, this is pretty consistent. But if they did the same trip with a standard bike, would they need a shower? And we saw it kind of either decrease in a little bit, but across the board, across the different groups. But in general, feeling that they might have used the shower or been more sweaty, obviously. Safer. In general, we're seeing that they all kind of feel that an e-bike they feel safer than on a standard bike. And I think this is, in looking at the comments, there's a little nuance. Some people feel like they had more power so they could move quicker within traffic. Or another woman felt that she was more steady on the bike because she had this power. So I think this is something that needs to be researched a little bit more about, is there an actual safety factor of riding an e-bike, or is that a perception of safety? What are the main advantages and the next one will be disadvantages? Obviously, increased speed, riding up hills with less effort. Health was a big advantage. What was interesting is this one right here, fun. This was a coded response. This was not one that we put out there. But 10% said, "Hey, this is a van. I'm having more fun." Which I thought was kind of interesting that we saw that many people add that. And then increased cargo capacity also there. Disadvantages, weight. So, which I didn't talk about earlier. In general, these bikes weigh more. They have a motor. They have a battery. On average, they can weigh 40 to 60 pounds, depending on the size of the battery or how big the bike is. Now, this can come into being a bigger issue if the battery runs out and you have to pedal the bike, which I had an electric bike and the battery ran out and I had to pedal home, and luckily I had very low gears. But and also like picking the bike up and maybe putting it onto a bus. There are restrictions in some cities, and TriMet has a restriction of 35, I think maybe it's 40 pounds on the racks, the front racks. And so, can somebody have a big e-bike and put it onto a bus? I think that's going to be a kind of a policy issue that needs to be investigated. Well, another one was kind of interesting here is none. There's no disadvantages to riding a bike. I thought that was kind of, it's the perfect solution for me. Cost, obviously, we looked at costs that can be kind of more costly, and maybe people with lower incomes don't feel like they can go buy one of these. And so, but I do think costs will go down as batteries costs go down. That's probably the main cost driver to these is the lithium batteries. But as we're producing more and with better technology, I think that will drive that cost down. And then the other thing was the range, limited range, which over half of the people said that their bike ran out of juice at some point, which, that's a fair number. But they weren't really thinking that this was a big disadvantage. So it could be, because you could still pedal it, or they were able to still get to where they needed to go, that it wasn't as big a disadvantage. Or as they learned the range and when they needed to plug it in and how long they could go, that they were able to adapt themselves, and that battery life didn't affect them. So conclusions, do e-bikes have the potential to get more people on bikes? And I think they do. I think, from the survey, we're seeing that the older adults, and particularly people with physical limitations, are using these e-bikes, and they would not have biked otherwise. And we saw that kind of, the jump of use too. The question is still with women. I think either, and I'll talk about the future research, but I think there's more that can be explored here about women in e-bikes. But here's some quotes. This is from a person that could not drive, could not take a bus because of physical limitations, and biking is the only way that they could do something because of the epilepsy and motion sickness. So that this is getting them to actually be able to get around. Also, people. I live in a hilly town and never commute to work on a standard bike. I wouldn't be able to make it up the hills. My electric assist allows me to do that. I'm 78 years old, legally blind, live alone in rural, so this is not just urban, and want to go to church for 12 miles. So it's getting more people biking that wouldn't bike. Does it encourage people who bike to bike more often? And I think some of the responses, or where it's pointing to that it can. It's breaking down some of the barriers based on how strenuous it is, or this issue about I don't want to go to work because I don't have a shower or I get sweaty. Not avoiding certain trips or locations, so it expanded people's reach or where they're going to go. And this kind of issue about enjoying biking, I think, was kind of really pervasive throughout the responses. You get this, I get more exercise in the e-bike because I ride more. E-bikes are a fantastic replacement for car for short trips. And I ride to and from work without needing a shower and destination. So these are people's responses. Again, I can carry my son and weeks worth of groceries on my bike. And so they're able to do those trips. So, limitations to this study, we don't have a response rate. I don't know how many people saw the survey, how many people, even got the survey. So it is a limitation. We did get, 553 people to respond, but also we don't, we really don't even know the market of the number of e-bikes. We can guesstimate that there's about 200,000 e-bikes. Method delivery, there's some bias in there in the places where we put the survey. It's an online survey, and a lot of this was self-reporting. And certainly, it's not a random survey of e-bike users. But additional research needs. So obviously, I think there's some stuff that we're going to do next, which is comparative analysis of the different regions. So with Australia and the United States. Australia is in kind of the similar place where the U.S. is on number of e-bikes. And so it's kind of, I think, a nice comparison of another region that's, starting to experiment and people starting to bike more. Infrastructure planning. There has been a lot of talk, really, on do we need infrastructure to plug in electric bikes for people to bike more. So Electric Avenue down at PSU does have an e-bike charger, so you can lock up your bike and charge your e-bike. But of course, every room has 110 outlets, and they can bring their bike in and charge. But I think there's some, is there range anxiety? Can infrastructure be planned better? But also in infrastructure is, which we'll talk a little bit in a second about interaction with other road users. in certain regions, and particularly right now in Toronto and New York, there are these battles. Should e-bikes be allowed on both bike paths? So they're banned now in a couple cities and regions. And in New York, you cannot ride an e-bike in the city limits. And so part of that was due to a lot of delivery services, food delivery services have e-bikes, and they were more the non-pedaling scooter type of e-bikes. And because of the state law, it puts it in this gray area which says if you have an electric motor, you need a license, and you can't ride it. And then New York City saying you can't ride an e-bike with electric motor. So it basically puts in a gray area that they're not allowed to use them. And so there's some legal definitions that need to be worked out, and also, you know, a discussion with other users of these shared facilities about what's right and where these different devices should be working in tandem together. Obviously, we need more evaluations of existing users, so either more surveys or evaluation about how they use their bikes. Studies of potential e-bike users, especially women and older adults. And I'm going to talk about that in a couple slides about some additional work that we're doing here at PSU. Safety is a concern, both on speed, but also do e-bike users obey the rules of the road or the infrastructure. So there are some projects going on right now around some e-bikes at the University of Tennessee, and they're looking at, do e-bike riders stop at stop signs? Do they obey, traffic rules? And so I think that's, something that's interesting. One thing that we did ask, and I don't know if it really kind of answers the question, but a majority, over 50%, said that they would stop at a stop sign with their e-bike versus their standard bike. And so I don't know if that is because they feel like, once they stop, it's so hard to get moving, but with an electric bike, you just, zoom ahead. I tend to sometimes do those little rolls through a stop sign. That's probably not, well, careful. Okay, so impacts of physical activity. I think there's some questions about that. People want to know, am I still getting the physical activity that I need with an e-bike? I think that depends on where you are and what type of user. So if you're an active bicyclist and you go to an e-bike, maybe not, but you might use it more often. A person who's never biked, use an e-bike, they're getting more physical activity. So I think there's some research that needs to happen there. Interaction with other users, road users, perceptions and attitudes. Dr. Dill had done some analysis of comments on the blogs, and there are, tensions between cyclists and e-bike cyclists. People say, are you cheating if you're riding an e-bike? You shouldn't be on a bike path. So there are these perception and attitudes. And then obviously policy and legal needs to be additionally researched. And finally, I'll just leave with, this is a project that is just kicking off. It's a joint project with Drive Oregon, Kaiser Permanente, and PSU. We are getting 30 Curry iZip folding electric bikes. They're top speed with the power. They're a pedal assist bike with a throttle, so they do a little bit of both. Top speed of 18 miles an hour. They have a range of 15 to 22 miles, weigh 42 pounds. And we're going to be giving them to Kaiser employees to use for about three months at a time. Primarily to encourage, this was a Metro RTO grant, to encourage first and last mile commuting. So, and that's why we got the folding, so they can take it on to the MAX or to a bus. But we also are encouraging them to use them whenever they would want to. We're going to be tracking their use and GPS and really see how they use these bikes. And so hopefully we're going to get about 180 people to use them over 18 months and dive into that. So this is my contact information. We are putting up a e-bike website to put up information. It's just getting online, so don't rush to it. It's not ready yet. But I also want to thank Professor Dill and Mark Persons, who were instrumental on this survey and all this work here, and then OTREC and NHTSA for funding the project. And then special thanks to Jeff Rose and Marilyn Johnson at Monash because of their letting us use the survey instrument. So that's it. Yep.
My question is, how is e-bike environmentally safe? Because you mentioned about e-bike being safe environmentally. I know it uses electronics and all this stuff. So how is it safe?
So I guess I wouldn't say it, that it's environmentally safe. It has less environmental burdens than driving a single occupancy vehicle. So if it's all how you compare. If you're comparing it to a bicycle, there's more environmental burdens. Producing a battery, obviously using electricity. Though we're very lucky in the Pacific Northwest, where we get a lot of our electricity from renewable sources. But the incremental burden of that on an e-bike compared to a car is pretty big. So that's where I was saying that it's probably better for the environment. It's more the mode shift. Yeah.
I'm just curious, you showed at the beginning of the presentation cycling numbers in cities across the US.
Yes.
Does the sale of e-bikes follow that same pattern through those cities, or do you know that?
No, and that's one thing. Getting sales data is incredibly hard in the US. These are, not only is half of the bikes conversions, so you're looking at buying motors and people buying, but also the industry is very new and they don't share data very well. So the industry data that we have is at the country level where they can see imports, exports. And so I don't have anything. I would love to get numbers of e-bikes purchased per city, and it'd be really interesting. But yeah.
Soloviev, and on the last slide you showed that the e-bike ranges like from 15 to 22 miles. I would just wonder, are those rechargeable batteries, or it depends on the bicycle when you pedal? Would that recharge the battery?
Oh,
would that be possible? Or?
Yeah. So that's interesting. They're not like a regenerative braking battery. These are more kind of like a cell battery, where once it's spent, you go charge it, like your cell phone. Though I did just get a blast that there is a company that is doing a regenerative hub motor that's trying to feed it back into the battery. So the technology is being played around with, but less so than in, I think, the automobile world.
How long it takes to charge the battery?
Yeah. Well, it obviously, depends on the size. So they're all very, there are different sizes. But a typical 12-watt, watt-hour battery is about 3 hours on a 110 outlet. So, yeah.
I was wondering if you guys were thinking about or have you heard of anyone that's thinking about setting up like a battery exchange where maybe you can trade, your battery's spent when you arrive to work, and maybe there's a place nearby where you can give your battery and pay like $5 or $10 in exchange for one that's fully charged, or something like that?
there are people playing with that, in particularly in e-bike sharing programs. So University of Tennessee has an e-bike sharing program where they have 2 pods on campus, and you can check out a battery, bike, wherever you want, and then you check it back in, and the next person won't get that same battery. They'll pull out a refreshed, fully charged battery. Berkeley is also starting to develop and launch an e-bike share program, and they're also looking into having that kind of shared, battery system. But I don't know how it, would work in a more dispersed kind of myself just going up and, and having that. But I think in bike share programs specifically, that's probably where these things are going to go.
I was wondering, would it be practical, you think, to move away from an e-bike to something that could be powered with like vegetable oil or something like that to help take care of the range problem? Or like the battery replacement problem?
Yeah, well, I have seen bikes and motorcycles that are, fueled by, diesel or vegetable oil. So, but you still, the thing that I would caution about those is that there's still a local air emissions issue that, and a lot of times the 2-stroke engines, motorcycles, have more pollution than per mile than even a car sometimes. So, but it's technology is always looking for new fuels.
Could you speculate a little more on the relationship between e-bikes and safety, and how you might research that in the future?
Yeah. So I know what they're trying to do, and what will be interesting based on like this project is if you have GPS data, and this is what they're doing at University of Tennessee, is they have second-by-second data in looking at a cyclist's route, the speed, and how long they stop, and they can kind of take a segment of road that might be more dangerous or more tricky or a very standard intersection, and see how long if they stop, because they can see the like this bike, we will hopefully have a power meter on it, so to see if the battery's on or if the bike is moving, and seeing if they stop and how long they stop. Same thing with a traffic light. So so that's one way in which we can kind of get some more kind of quantifiable evidence of how people are using them. But also observational data that we could be looking at how people ride their e-bike. I've thought if you put a GoPro on a couple bikes and see how the bikes are interacting with bikes going over the bridge or pedestrians. There is some concern that with e-bikes that when you see a person biking, and I don't know if it's that you just kind of know this, that you can kind of judge how fast they're going because of all the times you've seen a bike go by you. But when an e-bike goes, it's going a little faster, and the person's pedaling a little differently and giving you visual clues that are not the same as your normal. So for a pedestrian crossing a street, an e-bike might catch up to them quicker than they're ready for. So I think that might be kind of interesting to do some observational data on that. So.
Is there a clear delineation between e-bikes and mopeds and scooters? Is it the miles per hour or the fact that you see batteries?
Well, I mean, so yeah, mopeds, they have battery-powered mopeds and they have non-battery. So beyond the battery, yeah, it's about speed. And this operational pedal thing are the two things that clearly define an e-bike. So it's really that 20 miles an hour and less, and anything over that kicks you into a category where the bike needs to be licensed, and you need to be licensed to ride that bike.
Hi, you mentioned about the cargo capacity and transport of children that some people use e-bikes for. Have you guys done any looking as to the, there's a maximum wattage, there's some other restrictions on it. If those restrictions affect the ability of people to effectively use cargo bikes to transport larger loads like, a couple 40 or 50-pound kids, groceries, et cetera?
Yeah. I don't have an answer for that, but I was kind of wondering why the Oregon wattage is at 1,000. And I've been meaning to ask some people, but I'm wondering if that was set because of companies like Beeline that want to haul things and they need that more power. And so they purposely set that as a higher watt, for that reason. Now, that said is, should there be a clarification of power for bicycle type? You don't need a 1,000-watt bicycle to carry myself. You would, at 20 miles an hour, you wouldn't need that boost. So, yeah, it's a good question.
I was wondering if you guys gave customers who purchased a bike the option of registering the bike. That way, they could be better. They could be sent surveys later in the future, so that you guys could have more accurate statistics.
No, I haven't. But that's good. We haven't thought about that, but it's a good thought.
Well, my name is Sepos, and my question is the speed is increasable during using the electric by pedaling? For example, the normal speed or the maximum speed is 18 miles. Is it during using the electric by pedaling, the speed is going up? Because it's related to the safety also.
Yeah, I think why, are you asking why it's at?
The top speed for the e-bike is 18 miles. They estimated for 18 miles.
Yes.
Is it increasable by pedaling?
Yes. By pedaling. Yeah. So all these, you can go faster than 20 miles an hour, or whatever those limits are. But the regulations are, if you didn't pedal at all, how fast would the bike go? And they don't want it to go more than 20 miles an hour. But you can take, like any bike, as, there's not a speed limit on bikes. And so most of them do that. Now, because of the weight of the bike, and sometimes the way the bike is set up with the, a gear or motor will be harder to make it go faster, or pedal assist, than the throttle, so in the gearing. So one of the bikes that I've been riding, I could not make it go faster than 20 miles an hour, even if because I just didn't have any more gears, which is a little frustrating in that, it's really good at low speeds, but when I'm trying to do high speeds, I can't move faster, and other bicyclists are going faster than I am. So, yeah, thanks.
Gabe Russo. So my question's kind of twofold. First, you keep mentioning this license that you have to have if it's going to go over a certain speed.
Yeah.
Is that just a standard driver's license? And then second, it seems to me that e-biking can be a powerful carrot in reducing VMTs daily and annually when coming or dealing with small delivery agencies, pizzas, dry cleaning, things like that. Are there is there any legislation in any municipalities nationwide that help make that carrot possible? So, incentives for small companies to use e-bikes and not delivery automobiles.
Yeah. So your first question was about the license. What happens is once it's no longer, defined as an e-bike, it becomes a moped or a scooter. So you need to get a license that meets that definition. So, or a motorcycle or whatever, and those are a whole nother code that describes what then those bikes would be. As incentives, I'm not off the top of my head aware of particular incentives to move for delivering e-bikes. There, moving your goods through e-bikes. Though, like, why there are so many e-bikes in China is because they say you can't have a gas-powered scooter in the city limits. So thus, they're basically saying you have to electrify or ride a bike. So, there are places around the world that are forcing people to move towards electrified mobility. Though I was just talking to somebody on the way over here, and she said that there's she ran into a CSA, and the person bikes 100 pounds of goods around and delivers goods around from their CSA. And they do that because they got an incentive from a nonprofit, and they got advertising. So that also is helping incentivizing the use of the goods. And also, like PSU, we incentivize delivery of goods to the campus from our suppliers. So that's why Beeline actually supplies a lot of the offices here. Thank you.